Daring to set boundaries is having the courage to love yourself, even when you risk disappointing others. We have a hard time to set boundaries because, let's be honest, self-love and self-worth is a real problem in our today's society. If I set boundaries, I'm being selfish. Or if I begin setting boundaries, I will hurt others, or maybe even worse, I will be hurt by others.
Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome back to the Stress Podcast. I am your host, Julia Arndt, and I am so excited that you have decided to join me today for the next 20 to 30 minutes to talk about boundaries. Boundaries is honestly by far one of the most important topics and challenges that people have that I talk to on a very regular basis, because if you want to be mindfully productive, and as you know, we've been talking more and more about this over the last couple of episodes, then you need to set boundaries. It comes hand in hand. It's super intertwined and connected with each other. And I have also learned over the last couple of years that a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about boundaries, or they don't really know how to get started and how to set boundaries. So that's why I sat down today. I thought it is time to talk about the basics again. As you know, I already recorded a podcast episode for you last week about just mastering stress management at work and Zen in the 9 to 5. And so today is basically almost kind of like the follow-up of that, where we're talking a little bit about boundary setting. So super excited to jump with you into this topic today. But before we do so, two quick announcements. Number one, if you haven't yet, I would really, really love to see you join my weekly planning series, Plan Your Week with Julia. This is a 30-minute call every Monday at 8 a.m. PST to help you create a new habit, to create you a habit of setting very clear goals and priorities for the beginning of the week in order to be successful for the rest of the week and feel accomplished. Because I know, especially on a Monday, things can oftentimes feel very overwhelming and maybe anxiety inducing and not really good. So come and join us. It is such a wonderful group of people. It is absolutely for free. There's nothing you have to pay for this. I just want to give you that time in order to hold you to a new standard, to help you create a new habit, and to keep you committed to a new process. So join us for that. And then the other announcement that I'd like to make is for my new podcast series, Conversations with Julia. If you haven't yet, make sure to check out the podcast episode, The High Achievers Mindset: Break Limits for Extraordinary Results, because that was the very first podcast episode where I had you join the live recording. This is your possibility, besides the Plan Your Week with Julia sessions, to interact with me directly and to get coached, to get input from me, and to hear about how I think about the challenges that you have. So if you're curious to join one of the next Conversations with Julia podcast recordings, make sure that you click the link below in the show notes and that you register for the next time those shows are coming up. So without further ado, I would say that's probably all I wanted to share with you at this point about all things podcast and all things interacting with me. So now let's jump into the podcast episode, The Power of Boundaries, Embracing Self-Care and Personal Growth. Hello, my friend. I'm so excited that you have decided to listen to this podcast episode today, or maybe even watch it on YouTube. So hi there, if you are watching me live right now on a video. I'm excited that you're here because boundaries is such an important topic and there are so many misconceptions about it that I want to jump with you right into the first two reflection questions for you in order to figure a little bit more out. Number one, how well are you currently setting boundaries? So think about it on a scale of 1 to 10. 1, I'm not setting boundaries really well. I have everyone walk all over me. I always overwork myself because I say yes to everything. 2, 10, I'm setting boundaries super well. But I'm still listening to this podcast episode because maybe I can still learn something else about boundaries. And I assure you that you can absolutely do because we can always learn something, right? There's always some insight or some affirmation or validation or confirmation or repetition and reminder in these kind of resources that help you to become even better than you were before. So, where are you currently? On a scale of 1 to 10, how well are you setting boundaries? Think about that number for a moment in your head. Maybe it's a 5 out of 10, an 8 out of 10, a 2 out of 10. And then just sit with that number for a second. And then ask yourself, why is it so hard for you to set these boundaries? Why is it so hard to set boundaries? And I'll give you a couple of different examples. Pleasing people, really big one, setting boundaries. Because we are all, in a way, people pleasers. We all like to get external validation for the work that we're doing, and it feels good, right? So, if we are pleasing someone, if we're saying yes to somebody to do something, we kind of hope, in a way, that we're getting that affirmation and that external validation from that person, right? And that's why we keep pleasing people. Maybe we've never seen it any other way. Maybe your mom or your dad or your grandma or grandpa or someone that was really close to you in your life was a big people pleaser. And so then it is also kind of ingrained in you that you're just pleasing people and you're saying yes to everything. Maybe, and that's kind of in relation to that, you've never really learned to say no to things that people ask you of, right? Maybe you're also not really clear on what your boundaries should be. You have a hard time prioritizing. You don't know where the balance is between following rules in your company and flexibility, right? So, what do you have to say yes to? What is part of your job description almost? What is part of your responsibilities? And what is not? That's sometimes a super gray area. Let's be clear on that. So, it is really, really important to create awareness around that, and it is really important to create awareness around real emergencies and actual not emergencies. Because when someone wants something of you, let's be honest, they always make it an emergency because they would like to move forward with their project. And if nobody is setting boundaries, we are all just being reactive people. And we're just kind of almost having this like this power struggle of who is going to win almost first in their ask that they asked somebody, a stakeholder or client or so on, right? Maybe, just maybe, but I know that's probably applying to many of you. You have a hard time to communicate boundaries. You don't know how to communicate boundaries and you have a conflict aversion. You don't really like conflict and you feel like if you start to set boundaries, people are going to be not a fan of you, right? People will maybe think that you're a bad person and that you're not a people pleaser. And so they may turn away from you, right? And those are things for me that lead into those big misconceptions that we have about boundaries. For example, if I set boundaries, I'm being selfish. Or if I begin setting boundaries, I will hurt others, or maybe even worse, I will be hurt by others. You might also believe that if you set boundaries, then it means that you are angry, and people might perceive you as being an angry person. You might have a hard time and you think that if you set a boundary, it will cause feelings of guilt. So you feel guilty in a way. And then finally, this is a really big one and a really important one to break and to eliminate out of your thought process is boundaries are permanent and I'm afraid to burn bridges. All right, let's sit with that for a moment. Yeah, I know. It's not always so easy to set boundaries, right? And we think that if I'm making a decision today, it's going to be that decision for the rest of your life. And that's not the case. So completely eliminate that off your head. And let's be very clear and honest that that's not a boundary. Boundaries change all the time, and that's totally okay because your life evolves. Remember, change is the only constant in your life that you will always can rely on, that you can always rely on. And so boundaries are not permanent. Boundaries will shift and change. And it is important to look at your boundaries on a regular basis. So, again, if you have, for example, rated an 8 out of 10 on the boundaries that you're currently setting, and you're already pretty good at setting boundaries, that's great. So, let's use this podcast today and that insight in order to reflect on, are the things that I'm currently setting boundaries on still important to me? Or are they maybe not anymore? So that leads me into the 4-step process that I have created on setting boundaries. And the first one is to define your desired boundary. This is super important and something that I feel like 99% of us skip. And that's why we don't really know how to set boundaries in the first place, because we don't know how to set boundaries, because we don't know what our boundaries actually are. So the first step in setting boundaries is to define your desired boundaries. What is actually important to you? Let me give you a couple of examples here. For example, it is important for you that you have an hour in the morning to bring your children to childcare, and then to have 15 minutes for yourself to actually make breakfast and maybe even have a coffee or tea or even check your emails, right? And you can define that specific period of time. Is it 60 minutes? Is it 75 minutes? Is it 90 minutes? Is it a workout in the morning that's important for you? Is it making your bed in the morning that's important to you? It doesn't matter. It is just important that you define that boundary. Another boundary could be that you have not more than 2 or 3 hours of meetings per day on your calendar. Could be a boundary. Or that you have never more than 4 meetings back to back. Could be a boundary. Or it could be a boundary to say, I am taking a 2-hour lunch break every day because that's the only time where I actually have time for myself to move my body, to catch up on personal stuff, and to eat lunch. Could be a boundary. Let me give you a couple more examples because I I hope that there will be things coming up and popping into your head right now where you're like, oh yeah, that's a good one. That is actually a boundary, or that is actually something that's really important to me. Maybe it's important to you that you finish work at 4:30 in order to go to the gym for 40 minutes, for 45 minutes. Maybe have a yoga class twice a week and you really love that teacher, and that's your boundary. You can only work until 4 p.m. because at 5 p.m. is the yoga class and you do not want to miss that because you know that when you go there, you're actually a better person. You're better connected to yourself, you show up better to your family, and obviously you show up better for work. Those are all boundaries. They can be personal related and they can be professional related. Okay. So, really, really important first step when you're setting boundaries is to define your boundary. What is your boundary? What is actually important for you? So, now that you have defined it, now we can create some structure around your boundary. And that is step number 2, create. So, step number 1 is define, step number 2 is create. All right, now that you have a boundary defined, ask yourself, what kind of structure can I create around this boundary to help me better create that boundary in the future? For example, you work a lot on your calendar. Your calendar maybe is something that helps you manage your life, all right? And maybe, just maybe, your calendar is also something that other people have access to. No matter if it is because you have a shared calendar or you have a Calendly and people can schedule time with you through that, create that boundary. this is something, this is so, so important, honestly, because I see it so often. I have these conversations with people and they say to me, I really need one day to focus and work on my projects, and I can't have meetings because I know that totally throws me off. Or they say, I really want to go to this yoga class and to this exercise class 2 times a week. And then we look at their calendar and there's nothing there that actually reflects that statement. I was just talking to a client the other day and she said to me, I am getting married. I feel like I've already mentioned that in the other podcast, actually. Have I? Maybe I have. Well, then you're hearing about her again. Because we worked on her calendar and we talked about setting boundaries. And what did we look at? She said to me, I'm getting married at the end of the year. And it is really important to me at the end of the day to go to the gym at 5 p.m. We look at her calendar, first week, current week that we were looking at. And there was nothing on her calendar that blocked that 5 to 6 window. And she knew that if she wouldn't be able to make it during that time, she wouldn't go anymore because she just didn't have any mental energy and decision making power anymore to actually do it. And I said to her, plan and book and block that space. That is your structure. That is how you create structure around your boundaries. Okay. So it could be a calendar block. It could be a full calendar block, right? So we were talking about just a certain time slot to a full day. I have 2 days per week where I do not schedule any meetings. Tuesdays and Fridays are meeting free days for me because I create a lot of content and I know I need to be fully present to do that. Otherwise, the quality of this content is not going to be as good as I'd like it to be. Another structure to boundary setting could be a out of office message in your inbox. For example, you have a hard time to communicate that it is really important for you to completely disconnect in the evening and you don't want to check your emails anymore after 6 p.m. And if this is a new boundary that you're trying to enforce and bring into your life, then you might have a really hard time about that because you're a people pleaser and you feel like people might expect you to respond, which they might because they have learned that you're always responding to emails after 8 p.m. So now you have to almost teach people to learn a new way on how to operate with you. And a really wonderful way to do that is by creating an out of office notification. So people know, hey, she's actually out of office and she's going to respond to my email the next day. You can turn off your chat. You can set an out of office notification on your inbox. You could even create a really powerful email footer that says, here are my operating hours. Please do not expect any answers outside of my office hours. I do not check my emails. That is not aggressive behavior. This is clear communication. And communication is a super important part about setting boundaries, which we'll obviously get to. But first of all, we're creating that structure. And that is step number 2. So I'll just repeat myself. You can create calendar blocks and calendar reminders or out of office notifications. You can turn off your chat. You can leave maybe a status in your chat to say, I'm working X to Y hours, or when you're gone for an hour during the day, then block that. But your structure needs to represent what is actually important to you. Otherwise, people won't know. Okay. So that's really important. And then we can move to step number 3. Communicate. Well, let's be honest, step 3 and step 4 are about communication. So I'm going to give them to you as a package. Step number 3 is to communicate, and step number 4 is to be vulnerable, because that's oftentimes something that we forget to do. And it's a little bit of a magical secret thing that if you bring vulnerability into your communication, then people will connect to you and they will actually understand. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. But let's first of all talk about a high level communication setting for boundaries. All right. How to set boundaries and how to communicate them is by not over explaining yourself. Check in with yourself right now. We've all done this before. We create a new boundary and we're trying to communicate it to someone, and it's so, so hard to do that, right? It feels so uncomfortable. So I just justify myself because it feels so uncomfortable to set that boundary. Don't over explain yourself because that is a sign of weakness and a sign that you're not very confident about that boundary. And that's obviously not what you want. That's not what you want to bring across to that person, right? You want to come across confident and sure about yourself that that's just how it is. That's your life. That is your life. Let's say that again. That's so important. It is your life. And that's why you're setting boundaries. Because if you don't set boundaries, everyone is going to trample all over you because everyone at all times always wants something from you. And if you don't set boundaries, you're going to create a life that is full of resentment and anger, maybe with yourself and with other people, and that does not feel good. All right. So that's why you're setting boundaries. Don't over explain yourself. At the beginning, take small, considered steps, planned out steps, and buy yourself time if you need to. If it is the first time that you're setting a boundary around your new 4 to 5 p.m. block on your calendar, and someone schedules time over that, dare they do that. You need to expect that people violate your boundaries because they don't know any better. And that's okay. And I actually honestly hate the word violate because people just don't know any better. Let's be honest. So they're not really violating your boundary. Maybe it feels for you like they violated, but they have no idea. So there's no reason for you to react angrily towards them because they don't know any better. Instead, you can very nicely and very calmly respond to them and say, "Thank you so much for setting up this time. I'm really excited to talk with you soon. However, that time does not work for me." You don't have to say that you're going to the gym or that you're meeting a friend or that you're doing a journaling exercise or a meditation or that you're going to yoga. It doesn't matter. This is not for that person to know, right? That is your boundary. This is important for you to show up as your best self, period. That message that I just told you, hey, thank you so much for scheduling this time. Unfortunately, I do not have time during this time that you scheduled. Can you please find another time? Or even better, here are 2 time slots that work for me. Let me tell you something about that. Oftentimes, we don't do that. We just tell people to find time on our calendar. And I honestly do not like that anymore. I have done that in the past, for sure. Over years, when I worked in corporate America, I'm not doing that anymore. I am managing my time. I am considerate about my own time. And so if someone wants to meet with me, I give them time slots that work for me because I am the owner of my own time. So don't just let them schedule and find time on your calendar. Be more specific. Take those extra 1 or 2 minutes that it takes to give them 2 time slots that works for you. But then again, you are owning your own time management and your calendar management, and that's so important. So we talked about expecting violations, right? People will violate because they don't know any better. Start small, set boundaries with people that you don't know, or set boundaries via email instead of saying it out loud because maybe that makes you feel more uncomfortable and an email can be more reflective. And if need to, take time to respond. Thank you so much for sending me this request. Can I get back to you tomorrow? Can I consider this? Can I talk to my manager? Can I look at my other priorities that I have and get back to you tomorrow? Then this is so powerful because when you start to set boundaries, people will respect you more. They will, absolutely. I will promise you that people will respect you more. They're going to be like, oh, she or he is starting to set boundaries with me. That might not be very conscious. It might be more of a subconscious thing, but that creates respect. I get that all the time. People obviously know that I'm a peak performance coach and I teach time and calendar management and setting boundaries. And when they are on the receiving end, they they get triggered for a second. I've had literally people tell me, wow, that was kind of an interesting email to receive, right? Um, but then they say, this was such a powerful reminder on how I can set boundaries as well. And that's what you want. You want to create a culture at the end of the day of people being okay setting boundaries, because then it makes it more okay for you to set boundaries as well. So the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to communication, so to this third step, is that it is very helpful to be prepared, especially when you are starting to set boundaries and this is something new to you. There are a lot of different templates out there. I have a couple of templates as well. There are templates in the Peak Performance Method program, for example, as well, that you receive when you sign up for the program. And they're so powerful and they're so helpful. Why? Because I didn't just create them out of thin air. My clients created them and used them and shared them with me and with you, because I like to use things that actually work instead of just using theoretical things, right? And see how it sticks. No, let's do things the right way. Let's test them out. And it doesn't mean that you need to copy these word by word, but that you get inspiration from that and create your own communication templates. So being prepared, especially at the beginning when you start to set and communicate boundaries, is super important, to be more rational in your response than emotional. Because as we were talking earlier, those misconceptions that we have about boundaries, right? I'm angry, I feel guilty, I push people away. That creates an emotional charge, right? It feels super uncomfortable to set boundaries at the beginning. Let's be honest. And that's okay, because you're doing it for the first time. And so when you're doing something for the first time, no matter what it is, no matter if you're going for a run for the first time, or you're going into a yoga class for the first time, or you're going to do a very tricky financial analysis for the first time, it's going to be uncomfortable. So invite that in and accept that. It's okay that it's uncomfortable, okay? So discomfort when setting boundaries, absolutely normal and okay. So the last step that I have for you today on how to set boundaries is vulnerability. And as you know, maybe you don't, so I'm going to tell you about it. But there's a big person in America that's kind of coined the word vulnerability, and that's made vulnerability a lot more accessible. And her name is Brené Brown. If you've never heard about Brené Brown, then please go ahead and check her out, because she's really awesome. She has a book on vulnerability. She has multiple books, but the way of how she got really, really popular and well known was through her TEDx talk called The Power of Vulnerability. She's a shame and not vulnerability, but shame something researcher, and she's really cool. I highly encourage you to check her out, Brené Brown. She said, daring to set boundaries is having the courage to love yourself even when you risk disappointing others. So powerful. Let me repeat that. Daring to set boundaries is having the courage to love yourself, even when you risk disappointing others. We have a hard time to set boundaries because, let's be honest, self love and self worth is a real problem in our today's society. Something that we have never learned in school, something that we might not even have learned in our families, from our mother or from our dad, because they didn't really practice self love themselves. And so, not setting boundaries is to almost disrespect yourself and your life, right? And so, what I like about vulnerability and why I share that with you in connection to boundaries is because I have learned that when you create little pieces in your boundary templates that speak about you as a human being, then people will understand you even better. Let me give you now a couple of specific examples. To be honest, I'm a bit behind on my projects and I'm nervous to get everything done. I would really love to meet you. Can we reschedule to XXX? Or can I help you in another way? For example, connect you with someone else. Check in with yourself. First of all, have you ever received an email like that? Probably not. Number two, how would you feel if someone would send you an email like that? You'd probably think, oh, this person, I can so relate to this person because I feel the same way. And I applaud this person for setting this boundary. And I applaud this person for communicating it so well too. And you can do this too, because here are the templates right here. You can write them down, or like I said, they are accessible in the Peak Performance Method program. And then you can start setting boundaries. Let me give you another example. I can see the importance of the project. I'm also working on XYZ. They all have looming deadlines. Which project would you like me to park so I can focus on this? This could be a really powerful email to your manager, to your leader, that are constantly asking you for more things. But there are just so many hours in a day to get everything done. And that's so powerful. It's so powerful to set that boundary and to kind of have this short wake up call, even for them to say, excuse me, I'm already doing a million different things. Can you please give me a break? You're obviously not saying that, right? You are super smart about how you're communicating your boundaries with vulnerability. But then you'll see the beauty of boundaries is you only see how powerful they are if you start to set them. And here's the last example that I want to give you today. I'm trying to get ahead of some holiday, pre work travel, pre vacation stress and focus on the planning for insert project. So I'm being ruthless about meeting for the rest of the week, month, year. I don't want to leave you hanging. Tell me a little more about what you'd like to know, and I'll see if anyone else on the team can support. That is vulnerability. Why? Because everyone can relate that we are trying to get ahead of some holiday pre work, travel, pre vacation stress and focus on a specific project. It might suck. And if you're on the receiving end, you might think, oh, but I also have this project that I would really like to get done. And then you can communicate that equally and can say, listen, I'm actually in the same boat and I have this one specific question for you. And that would really help me if you give me an answer to that. That is beautiful, powerful communication. You don't get angry, you don't feel offended, you don't get triggered, you don't get angry, you don't feel guilty. You just you're just a human being and you navigate your life gracefully, consciously, intentionally by communicating what you need and finding compromise. I know that's not so easy, and there's probably opportunity here for a podcast on how to compromise better, right? If you are interested, let me know. Um, but yeah, it's it's sometimes so easy, but we don't try. Or sometimes we think I need 30 minutes of meetings, even though you just have one quick question and it can be resolved via email in 5 minutes, right? And so you just become more intentional about what you need, what you're going to ask for, how you're communicating. And that's really the beauty of setting boundaries. So I really love to set boundaries. I'm doing it more and more. I still feel uncomfortable, honestly, sometimes when I set boundaries. I, for example, set boundaries twice today. I'll share those specific examples with you too. I have my family coming to town from Germany this month. I've probably mentioned that already in my previous podcast as well. And I'm really excited about it and I'm trying to create space. So I'm working up front in order to get everything done. And so I had two meetings on my calendar today. One was a catch-up meeting with a good friend of mine that I talk to once a month, and she's amazing and she's super inspiring, and I always love to talk to her. But there was just no time this week. We were supposed to meet on Wednesday, then I tried to move it to Thursday, and then finally to Friday, to today, as I'm recording this podcast episode. And I emailed her yesterday and I said, listen, I'm so sorry. I would love to see you and I would love to hear an update about what's going on, but I just have overbooked and planned myself. My family is coming to town. I'm trying to get my most important projects done. I think we need to just cancel this month's check-in. Let's do it next month. That's a vulnerable, honest email, and I know that she's totally going to understand. The second example that I have for you that I actually just said today was a new potential client that wanted to have more time with me. I talked to him yesterday. We had a really good connection, and I really enjoyed talking to him, and I really wanted to have another call with him. I set up time for today. And already when I said it in the back of my head, I was like, I don't really know if I can do this. And then at the end of yesterday, when I still didn't get all of the things done that I wanted to get done, I was like, oh, and I still have this meeting on my calendar. And I'd be lying to myself if I would tell myself that I can do this, because it is more important for me to feel good about the responsibilities that I have. And that particular call is unfortunately not a priority for this week. So I emailed him and I said, it was really wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. I would really like to continue this conversation, but I honestly completely overbooked myself for today. Can you please find another time on my calendar? And I sent him my calendar link and he set up a new time, and that's all that happened. It's okay. People understand. Meetings are getting moved all the time. And again, remind yourself that you just have to communicate and share as much as is comfortable for you. And I obviously share more with people that are closer to me than people that are new to me, right? And then I just say, my calendar is blocked. And that's all that matters, right? They don't need to know all of the details. So that is just the start of setting boundaries, but I don't want to overwhelm you. So we're going to leave it at this today. And I'm going to just summarize a couple of these important things that I shared with you today. So there's 4 steps to setting boundaries. Number 1, define your boundary. Identify your desired boundaries. Number 2, create a structure to setting boundaries. We talked about calendar blocks, out of office notifications, email footers. It could be a sign at the door if you have a physical location, all of these different things are structures that you're creating to set boundaries. Step number 3 is to communicate and not over explain. And number 4 is to be vulnerable and say why it is important to you to set this boundary. So be clear on your own rules. Clearly communicate your boundaries and be ruthless at the start. This is an important one. We haven't really talked about this. I do want to mention something about that for a second here. Be ruthless at the start when you set boundaries. Why? Because you are creating a new boundary. It is new for you and it is new for the person that's on the receiving end. If you are wishy-washy with your boundary and sometimes you say yes to a 7 o'clock p.m. meeting, and sometimes you say no, or you say, you are sending out an out of office notification that says, I'm not checking my emails after 6 p.m., and yet they still get a response at 9 p.m. to their email, then you violate your own boundary and you're sending mixed signals, and people will be violating your boundary too because you violated it yourself. That is why, especially at the beginning, when you start a habit of creating a new boundary, you have to be ruthless. You have to learn to the person on the receiving end that that's how you operate now. You don't check emails anymore at the end of the day. You don't respond anymore to emails. If you want to really check and send emails, schedule them for the next day, something that I do all the time. I don't, of course, sometimes I check emails during the weekends because I have a moment and my time is super flexible. And sometimes I take a Monday off or Wednesday off if I can and if I want to. And then I work on a Saturday maybe for 2 or 3 hours. But I'm scheduled sending my emails because I do not want to encourage my clients to read emails during the weekend. I do not want to learn to them that I am working during the weekends. And I don't also want to receive a response from them because I want them to enjoy and relax on the weekend too. Okay. So there are ways to kind of overcome these different things. Be ruthless at the start. That's really important. And then finally, practice, practice, practice. And if things don't work quite well for you, if you maybe try out a few different things and then you come back and you're like, oh, either you violated your own boundary or it's still not really clear, then go back to step number one to define your boundary. Reflect on your boundaries. Are those really the most important ones, or do you actually have to rewrite them? That's totally okay as well. Because remember, boundaries are not permanent, they are going to change over time, and that's totally okay. So, my dear friend, that's all I wanted to share with you today about the power of boundaries, embracing self care and personal growth. Boundaries are so beautiful. And when you start setting them, you're going to feel so empowered and so proud of yourself. And not just that, but also other people will respect you so much more. Because there's another powerful saying that I'm going to share with you now at the end of our session today, which is a lack. If you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. Or there's another really cool one that goes about something like this: a lack of boundaries creates a lack of respect. So create boundaries to bring in more respect into your life. You don't have to please people to be liked. And if that's how people perceive you, then reflect on how that relationship is with that person, and if that person is actually really honestly true to you, right? So, the best way to support me and say thank you for this episode is by sharing it with one person that would benefit from this content. Thank you so much in advance for doing that for me. I really, really appreciate you. I do hope to see you in the next Plan Your Week with Julia session, or even on the next Conversations with Julia podcast recording. I am so grateful that you're here. I wish you all the best. I hope that you have a lot more clarity now around how to set boundaries in the future. And if not, send me an email and ask me a question. I always love to hear from you. So that's all I wanted to share. Thank you so much again. Take care of yourself and talk to you really soon.